Attacking art, especially famous art, garners a lot of attention. But it begs the bigger question, why, out of all possible targets, would someone be motivated to put what is beautiful in their crosshairs? And in asking why art, it's not just any art. After all, no one's attacking Tracy Emin's unmade bed or any other exhibit at some modern contemporary art museum. No, they're targeting Van Gogh, Vermeer, Monet, works which transcend their medium to become more than representations of beauty, but rather the very embodiment of beauty itself. But why?
Where'd you go, psycho boy?
I felt like destroying something beautiful.
Well, something beautiful, especially something of extreme beauty, like the works of Van Gogh and Monet, are more than just some pretty paintings. And beauty itself is more than just some adjective or descriptor for the aesthetically pleasing state of a person, place, or thing. Beauty is striking, like Newton's apple. It falls upon us in epiphanic awe, arresting our attention and drawing us magnetically to it for seemingly no other reason than to behold it, wonderstruck, mesmerized, and bewildered. And as curious as that seems, we recognize the simple truth that just as we do not pick our interests pick us. Likewise, the awe we encounter in the world via beauty is not inspired within ourselves by ourselves, but rather inspired in us by what is outside ourselves, and not just outside, but what is grander and undeniably greater than we are. And so it is with beauty. While at times subjective, the oft-claimed eye of the beholder, any honest person can see less of it is so than isn't. Which is to say, much of what is beautiful in life is undeniably so. Sunsets, mountain vistas, the works of great masters. Only a sardonic narcissist would beg to differ, and just for the sake of differing. But even where personal tastes and preferences may vary, the principle of beauty, and moreover, the arresting power beauty has in the eye of the one beholding it, speaks to its higher nature. And that is because beauty, as more than just a composite of its appealing features, transcends the mundane, as if to rebuke it. In this way, beauty is incontrovertible proof that all in life is not as it could be. We are not all that we could be. To quote a certain singing princess, there must be more than this provincial life, and beauty makes sure that we know that to be true. It's a window into a better world, like all of life's extolled virtues, a standard against which we measure ourselves and others and are found to be wanting. And that's the point.
Surely you can choose more elevated themes.
Oh, elevated. What does that mean, elevated? Why must we go on forever, writing only about gods and legends?
Because they do. They go on forever. At least what they represent.
Those virtues which go on forever exist above us, and when allowed to have their intended effect, pull us upward towards them. Beauty, as such a virtue, be it found in the arts or in nature, ranging from a songbird to a symphony, judges us as if from on high, because it is. And deep down in our bones, even if at only an unconscious level, we know that to be true. It's why people congregate at places of beauty, be it a hiking trail in the mountains, taking in an oceanside sunset, or staring longingly out into the starry night sky. The draw is undeniable. Same for man-made art, architecture, design, and all the like. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel attracts us, grabs our attention, and overwhelms us with a feeling of worshipful awe, not just because of the subject matter, no. It's the mouth agape, breathtaking bewilderment of contending with such masterful beauty that renders us speechless, contemplative, and reverent to the point to where even the most hard-hearted of atheists is moved by that which lies before them. People will sit and stare and stare and stare because we know in such a place we have come face to face with something different from everyday life, separate, set apart, the very definition of holy. And in coming face to face with magnificence of such magnitude, words fail, especially from unclean lips. It's why in the biblical story of Isaiah, he's rendered speechless in the presence of God, because he's simultaneously overwhelmed by the glory of the Lord before him, as well as by his own inadequacy and the gulf that exists in such a comparison. And finding himself before such a judge, he's weighed and found wanting. And he knows it. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim were standing above him, and one called out to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out. Then I said, "Woe to me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." But the Lord, the highest ideal of good and therefore ultimate judge, who had every right to squash this unclean being before him, bridges the gulf between them by extending purification, burning off what is unclean and allowing Isaiah to stand there in renewed fellowship, because that's what a good judge does. The good standard pulls you up towards it, as we see in the next passage. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips, and your guilt is taken away, and atonement is made for your sins." The good judge, infinitely beyond your reach, invites you to contemplate your own wretchedness, accept where you fall short, and be cleansed through the burning off of the dead wood, which otherwise conspires to pull you down to hell. But how exactly does one go about this, you ask? By accepting the burning coal, accepting the judgment, which is to accept where you fall short, which, for the willing, doesn't come with damnation, but rather renewal. A purification, which is to say, preparation for being called into service of the ideal, of the judge, of the standard. The passage concludes, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?' Then I said, 'Here am I, send me.' And he said, 'Go.' You have come face to face with a virtue, an ideal, a standard, a judge, and you don't live up to it, and you know it. But in accepting that and welcoming the judgment, you welcome the transformation to be more like that which sits above you, and thereby call others to it as you were called. Beauty is such a virtue, because no matter how great you think you are and all your boastful vanity and pride, when face to face with the beautiful, you hear the voice of a judge saying, 'You're not everything you could be. Your life isn't everything it could be. There are things greater than you, higher than you, that you could be emulating and striving towards. You're not the grand total of your maximum potential. And contending now with me as you have, you know it to be true. But for those who submit to it and accept that judgment, comes transformation.'" None of this is to say that beauty is a tyrannical judge. No good judge is. It's not lording it over you so as to crush you, and ultimately wants nothing more for you than your welfare. It has come from on high with a call to lift up all who hear it, gifting glimpses into infinite glory. The ideal lifts you up. You lift up the ideal. The reflection of the ideal in you lifts up others. The ideal is further lifted up, and on it goes. But the ideal / virtue, or more clearly put, purpose of beauty, isn't one of hedonistic superficiality. Beauty is an outward sign of an invisible truth, a reflection of the utmost good, the ideal of ideals, the highest virtue of something, someone who sits even higher to beauty than beauty sits above us. The Apostle Paul says as much about creation in stating how God's eternal power and divine nature can be perceived and understood by what has been made. Therefore, we say that beauty, as a virtue, is better than what is ugly because beauty testifies to there being more to life than the banal, miserable, dirty, diseased, decaying wretchedness of so much of our existence. Yes, death and decay are parts of our world, but beauty rejects the notion that because they come at what seems to be the end, they are then logically all that life is, or all it ultimately has to offer. Beauty rebukes such dark nihilism. It shows us glimpses of a greater glory beyond this world, one wherein we see that just because death and decay are the end of a thing, they are not the end of all things. As the Apostle Paul and later English poet John Donne both write, one day death too shall die. We see this even in our natural world, wherein the leafless cold, dark, and bitter winter gives way to the spring sun rising, snow melting, and new life bounding forth in nature's annual rebirth. And beauty, in mercifully gracing our lives with its presence, reminds us of this. This thesis, of course, isn't new or revelatory, and for most of the past few millennia, such a view of the goodness and higher nature of beauty as judge was self-evident. Even up until recently, it was simply what was so. That's why we've put beauty on pedestals, dressed up in tuxedos to go listen to it, enshrined it in artful buildings, which in and of themselves mirror the sacred ideal in a cacophonous acknowledgement of the value and worth of beauty. We've looked up to it, celebrated it, praised it, and sought to emulate it. And it's for this very same reason that when you go into a modern art museum and see something banal like Duchamp's urinal in a showcase, something intrinsically feels off, like a bait and switch, because that's what it is. You look upon the pedestal at beauty's usurper and guffaw at the subversion of what the soul naturally longs for. And after your initial shock wears off, you're then able to see the brazen coup attempt for what it really is. A practical joke, one at your expense. But you're not laughing, nobody is. No one except those who seek to dethrone beauty from its rightful place by crowning some bastard heir in her stead and expecting us all to go along. You can call an unmade bed art if you want, fine, you do you. But you can't call it beautiful. Not if you're being honest. Now, this isn't to claim that beauty through art comes to us in only one way. Of course, it changes and evolves. Bach gives way to Beethoven, and the Dutch masters look quite different from anything the Impressionists were doing. But that's very different from setting out to destroy art through degradation of the medium itself, and then try and force us all to call it beautiful. Or when that's taking too long, with a can of tomato soup. And yet, as attacks on beauty, both directly and indirectly, grow in popularity, it's not the vandals receiving universal rebuke, but rather those voices seeking to defend the noble virtue of beauty who are contemptuously scorned. But this is because saying beauty is better has only become controversial in a world bent on Saturnalian mockery that calls up, down, and evil good. A world wherein the shallow, self-satisfied narcissist hates beauty specifically because they hate the higher virtue it reflects, the ideal of ideals, the ultimate judge and standard against which you are measured and found wanting. If there are no higher standards, no judges, then there's no falling short, no sin. And if there's no shortcoming, then there's no need for purification, nothing to burn off, nothing to change. Like Milton's Lucifer, it's the easy way out, looking round about the hell you find yourself in and just deciding to call it heaven. And while lying to yourself and others may be easier than confronting reality and accepting the call to change, Believing that lie is another thing entirely. Because just as the higher virtues, standards, and judges pull us up to heaven, the darker ones just as potently pull you down further and further into hell. After all, it's not for nothing that ancient writers call it a bottomless pit. And so in such an upside-down world, the newfangled villains become those people, places, and things that cling to the higher virtues. And in this case, in particular, those creations which point to the awe-inspiring virtue of beauty. Monet, Vermeer, Van Gogh. And so in the eyes of these modern-day Lucifers, those creations have to be mocked and derided. But they know what they're up against, and they know that their lies and refusals of the old judges have to be substantiated by something potent enough to try and convince themselves and any other would-be fallen angels to the superiority of their claims over yours.
What is worth more, art or life?
Seeking to take advantage of your philosophical charity, your giving the benefit of the doubt, the selfish, wayward soul imagines you can be tricked into agreeing with their Luciferian lies if their actions can be wrapped up in some supercilious dogmatic claim about having done it for some noble cause in which they conveniently get to play the martyr. But the truth is as clear as day. Such victorious proclamations ring hollow and false, because everyone knows that instead of curing what ails society by attacking the judge who calls us to a higher version of ourselves, these deluded activists serve to only make the world look more like the ugly hate which took hold of and destroyed their own hearts in the first place.
Margot's heart is twisted. He would make himself into what twisted him.
But if we let beauty take its natural place, unassailed, and allow our confrontation of it to have its intended effect, be it a mountaintop vista or the city of lights, the worshipful awe it inspires in us will act as a bulwark and defense against the bitterness and resentment that ugly darkness and decay bid us wallow in. Therefore, let us be awestruck, speechless, moved to tears before the altar of beauty, accepting it as our judge, the higher ideal and virtue which bids us to promote it, celebrate it, and even create it where we can in our lives and in the lives of others. And in that way, lift ourselves up towards the ultimate judge and standard of goodness, to bring ourselves and all those round about us closer and closer to paradise.